February 1258. A man walks through his own treasury. Guards flank him on both sides, not his guards. He's looking at gold he spent 50 years protecting. Gold that bought silks. Gold that paid scholars. Gold that filled vaults, while his army went without armor. The men beside him are watching his face. They're waiting to see if he understands yet. He doesn't speak. Behind him, his city is burning. Ahead of him, something worse than fire. This is Caliph al-Mustasim, ruler of Baghdad, commander of the faithful, spiritual heir to Muhammad himself. In 3 hours, he'll be dead, but not by blade, not by arrow, not by any method you'd expect, because the men who destroyed his city follow rules you've never heard of. And what they did to his family wasn't just execution, it was architecture, a blueprint printed in blood, so that every king from Damascus to Delhi would know exactly what defiance costs. They didn't need to repeat it. They only needed to do it once. For 500 years, Baghdad was the axis, not just of an empire, of thought itself. This was the city where Greek philosophy met Persian astronomy, where Indian mathematics merged with Islamic law, where the world's knowledge concentrated into libraries that catalogued everything from medicine to mechanics. The House of Wisdom alone held texts that would take you 3 lifetimes to read. Al-Khwarizmi invented algebra here. Al-Razi wrote medical encyclopedias that Europe would translate 400 years later. Scholars traveled from Spain to Samarkand just to study in Baghdad's academies. The city's population exceeded 1 million. Its infrastructure channeled water through underground canals. Its markets traded goods from China to Cordoba. Its hospitals treated patients regardless of faith or wealth. This wasn't Rome fading into memory. This was a civilization at its operational peak, and ruling over all of it, the Caliph. Not just a king, not just a political figure. The Caliph was the successor to Muhammad, the spiritual authority over millions of Muslims, a man whose legitimacy stretched back through 37 generations. Al-Mustasim inherited that title in 1242. He also inherited something else, a government that had been decaying for 2 centuries. The Abbasid Caliphate still spoke with religious authority. But its armies? Mostly mercenaries. Its governors? Semi-independent warlords. Its treasury? Filled but never spent on defense. Because Baghdad had survived internal weakness before. It had endured civil wars. It had outlasted rival caliphs. It had watched empires rise and collapse around it, while its scholars kept writing and its markets kept trading. So when distant reports arrived about horsemen in the east, horsemen who had already erased the Khwarezmian Empire, horsemen who had depopulated cities in Persia, horsemen who didn't stop at rivers or mountains or negotiated borders, Baghdad took note and did nothing. The Mongols weren't an army, they were a mechanism, a system refined over 50 years of constant warfare across terrain that spanned frozen steppe to desert to mountain range. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, he left behind something unprecedented. Not just territory, not just conquered peoples. He left behind a military doctrine that turned warfare into replicable process. And one of Genghis's grandsons, Hulagu Khan, was tasked with carrying it west. In 1253, the Mongol Kurultai assigned Hulagu a specific objective: secure submission from every state between Mongolia and the Mediterranean. Not just military defeat, submission, because the Mongol Empire wasn't built on occupation, it was built on compliance. Cities that submitted early retained their autonomy. Their leaders stayed in power. Their people continued their lives. They just paid tribute and acknowledged Mongol supremacy. Cities that resisted stopped existing. Every target received the same sequence. Mongol messengers arrive. They present terms in writing. Submit immediately. Send tribute. Provide hostages, usually sons of rulers. Accept Mongol governance. Compliance means survival. Your walls stay standing. Your markets stay open. Your population lives. Refusal triggers nothing immediate. No threats. No ultimatums, just silence. Weeks pass, sometimes months. The city continues its routine. Defenders begin to think maybe the Mongols were bluffing. Maybe they moved on to easier targets. And then the horizon fills with horsemen. Not in chaos, not in scattered groups, in formation. Cavalry units move in coordinated patterns. Siege engines arrive on wagons. The army doesn't attack. It surrounds, completely. Every gate, every road, every escape route. Then construction begins. In full view of the defenders, the Mongols assemble siege equipment. Trebuchets designed to throw stones, weighing 300 pounds. Engineers from China and Persia work alongside Mongol soldiers. The defenders watch machines being built, specifically to dismantle their walls. A second embassy arrives. The terms are repeated, word for word, exactly as before. This is the last chance. Most cities surrender here. If refusal continues, the siege begins. Not as chaos, as procedure. When walls collapse, infantry moves through in units. When gates break, cavalry secures routes. The city falls in sections, and once inside, the population is divided. Artisans, identified and spared. Scholars, identified and spared. Engineers, identified and spared. Everyone else, gathered in fields outside the city. What happened next was documented by multiple sources, and it wasn't random violence, it was systematic elimination. The survivors were resettled in Mongol territories. The city itself was often burned, not as punishment, as evidence, because the Mongols didn't conquer for territory, they conquered for compliance, and every ruined city became a textbook for the next one. By 1257, Hulagu had already applied this system across Persia. Nishapur refused, population eliminated. Merv refused, systematically depopulated. Herat refused, reduced to ruins. Refusal had consequences that echoed across generations. And now Hulagu turned toward the greatest city between Persia and Egypt, Baghdad. In September 1257, Hulagu sent his envoys to Baghdad, 3 riders carrying a single letter. You have heard what has befallen the cities of Persia. You know the cost of refusal. Present yourself at our camp. Submit to the authority of the great Khan. Dismantle your fortifications. Send your sons as hostages. Do this, and your city will be spared. Refuse, and you will learn what the others learned. The letter arrived at the Caliph's court on a Thursday. By Friday, the debate had begun. Caliph al-Mustasim convened his advisors. The room divided immediately. His vizier, Ibn al-Alqami, urged immediate compliance. He laid out the evidence. The Khwarezmian Empire had fielded 400,000 soldiers. They had fortified cities, they had mountain strongholds. All of it gone. Nishapur had walls 30 feet thick. Merv had been called the city the world depends on. All of them erased. These are not raiders, Ibn al-Alqami said. This is a military system that has refined itself across 50 years of continuous warfare. We cannot fight them, we can only survive them. He recommended immediate submission. Full tribute payment. Opening Baghdad's gates before the siege began, the head of Baghdad's army disagreed. The Mongols were horsemen, steppe cavalry. They excelled in open terrain. Baghdad's walls had never been breached. They have no experience with siege warfare against prepared defenses, he argued, and they're far from their supply base. They can't maintain a siege in hostile territory. A third faction invoked theology. Baghdad was the seat of the Caliphate. The city represented the center of Islamic civilization. God would not allow pagans to destroy the house of the Prophet's lineage, they argued. Al-Mustasim listened. He was 54 years old. He had ruled for 16 years. He had never faced a military crisis of this scale. Contemporary sources describe him as fond of luxury, devoted to scholarship, uncomfortable with military matters, trusting in the authority of his position. He looked at the letter from Hulagu. He looked at his advisors, and he made his choice. We are the Caliphate, he said. "We do not submit to threats from horsemen." He ordered the envoys dismissed. No tribute would be sent, no preparations would be made. Ibn al-Alqami, the pragmatist vizier, tried one more time. "If we refuse, they will come. Then let them come," al-Mustasim replied. The envoys left Baghdad on September the 24th, 1257. They carried no response, just confirmation of refusal. What followed was more telling than the refusal itself. The Caliph didn't mobilize the army. He didn't reinforce the walls. He didn't open the treasury to pay for defenses. Instead, he continued his routine, as if the threat would dissolve through inaction. Meanwhile, 300 miles to the east, Hulagu's army began moving. November 11th, 1257. Mongol advance forces appeared 30 miles east of Baghdad. Scouts reported back to the city. Cavalry units, estimated 5,000 horsemen, no siege equipment visible. The military commander saw opportunity. If the Mongol force was small and isolated, Baghdad could destroy it in open terrain. A decisive victory would demonstrate Baghdad's military capability and discourage further Mongol advance. The commander recommended immediate offensive action. The Caliph agreed. On November 13th, Baghdad's field army marched east. 20,000 men, 12,000 cavalry, 8,000 infantry. This was the largest force the Caliphate had assembled in decades. They carried 3 days of supplies. The plan was simple: intercept the Mongol advance force, engage in open battle, destroy them before reinforcements arrived, return to Baghdad victorious. November 15th, 1257. The armies met 25 miles northeast of Baghdad. Baghdad's commander deployed his forces in traditional formation: cavalry on the wings, infantry in the center. The Mongol force was visible across the field. Smaller than expected, maybe 4,000 horsemen. Baghdad's cavalry charged. What happened next was recorded by survivors who fled back to Baghdad. The Mongol line retreated, not in panic, in coordination. They fell back in organized units. Baghdad's cavalry pursued. The retreat continued, 1 mile, 2 miles, still organized. Then the flanks appeared. Mongol cavalry units that had been hidden in gullies to the north and south emerged simultaneously. Baghdad's cavalry found itself surrounded, not by the 4,000 horsemen they'd been chasing, by 15,000. What followed wasn't a battle, it was dismantling. Mongol cavalry archers fired while riding at full gallop. They used composite bows that could punch through armor at 200 yards. Baghdad's cavalry tried to regroup. The formations had already disintegrated. Officers shouted orders that couldn't be heard over the chaos. The infantry, watching from their position, saw the cavalry wings disappear into the Mongol formation. They began retreating toward Baghdad. The Mongols didn't pursue. They surrounded the remaining cavalry and methodically eliminated them. By nightfall, it was over. Survivors who reached Baghdad reported, of 20,000 men who marched out, fewer than 3,000 returned. The Caliph's personal guard eliminated. The cavalry mercenaries destroyed. Baghdad's field army no longer existed, not routed, not scattered, erased. When the survivors' reports reached the court, the nature of the situation changed. This wasn't a raiding party, this was a trap. The Mongols had used a small detachment to draw Baghdad's army into the open and eliminated it